Hello everyone, this is Dr. Moriarty at CEC Early College in Denver Public Schools, and this is a video talking about how to implement Gravity using the Allegro game library in C++. In this video, I'm assuming that you are already okay with the basics of Allegro. I'm not going to really go into any of the background of this game, such as the keyboard input or the game timer or things like that. I really don't recommend starting with this video if you don't already have that stuff practiced and understood. Okay, so this is what it's going to look like when it's run. It's not necessarily perfect for all games. If you notice when I'm pressing both the up and the right hand buttons here, and as soon as I let go, it stops moving in the left or right direction. So there isn't really any inertia programmed into this Gravity. And we might want to add that later on if we're doing a platformer game that requires that so it doesn't look weird. But anyways, let's go ahead and get started with what we have here. I'm, again, just going to skim over this first part because you should already be okay with that. I've included a lot more of the Allegro helper libraries than we really need for this, just so I can add on to it later. We've got some constants here. We've got some global functions. Sorry, not functions, global. We have an array and enumeration here. Here we have the beginning of our main function before the game loop. We have some game variables, some Allegro variables, player variables. Here's the first stuff that might be a little bit new, even if you have worked with Allegro. So we've always had an X and Y position for our player or whatever thing is on the game screen. But what is new here for Gravity is that we have this new Boolean value may jump again, and that's just to keep double jumping under control. We can work with this later. It's not necessarily turning it on or off right here, but it's going to allow us to stop that from happening or only happen when we want it to happen. Then we also have this really other important variable is on solid ground, which is exactly what it sounds like. If you are on the ground, whether it be the actual ground or on a platform or something like that, we want to stop falling. We don't want gravity to be applied to at that point. Notice also we have, you can think of this as component velocity. So we're going to be taking a velocity of x in the x direction, so left or right movement, and adding it to our xy position. We're not going to actually be messing with the x and y variables directly. Okay? All right, program setup. This is a review. We're getting all these libraries set up again, even though we're not really using a lot of these, but they're ready to roll if we want to add stuff to this. You don't actually have to have any of these four. Yeah, that shouldn't actually be needed because we don't actually upload anything into our player. For our player, we are creating a bitmap. We're not using a primitive. We're not like drawing the player as a square. The reason for that is that if you're going to use this for a game later on, like Geometry Dash or like a Mario style platformer, we'd be able to easily slip a picture in here for this, whether it be a sprite sheet or just a plain old JPEG or whatever. Okay. This is setting up the actual game. You should have seen this before, just setting up the display, the event queue, the timer. If you don't know what those things are, you should definitely go back and watch a different video or ask me for some help on that. Here's our game loop. Right away, as always, we set up an event queue. I actually have the keyboard section first. So remember the basic sections of your game loop for an Allegro game. You're going to have some sort of like input-output section. Keyboard is the one we use the most in my class. Then you're going to have some sort of timer section, and you're going to have some sort of render section. They don't necessarily have to be in that order. In fact, usually the way I do it is I usually put the timer section first, but it doesn't really matter. So I put the keyboard section in first. So we've got some code just checking to see if keys have been pushed down, some code checking if keys have been let go of. And then, so here's our timer section. Okay, so here's where the actual gravity is going to happen, is in the timer section. So let's kind of go in order. So this isn't really gravity itself. This is stopping gravity when we hit the bottom. I don't have anything in here yet for actual platforms or things like that. The only time we're going to stop at the moment with this particular game, the way it sees, is just when you hit the bottom. So I'm just saying, like, hey, if the square plus its size, because our player at the moment is 32, if that ever goes below the bottom of the screen, go ahead and stop any kind of Y velocity, stop it from moving down, and just reset. You know, if he's going fast enough that he actually does go a little bit below the bottom of the screen, set him so he's just like standing on the screen. Okay? And then set this variable is on solid ground true. Okay? So that's gonna gravity itself is gonna look at that later on. Okay? This is nothing new. You've seen this since really probably within the first couple weeks of second semester. This is just stopping you from going off the side of the screen. This stops you from heading off to the right side. This stops you from going off from the left side. And this stops you from going off the top. Who knows, maybe you want to comment this out or take it out if your game, if that makes sense in your game to be able to walk off the side of the screen. Let's say like that's your, once the player walks off the side of the screen, that triggers some sort of like a map change or something. So you might actually not want that later on, depending on what you're doing with your game. Not necessary. Okay, here's jumping. So let me just point out that down here, with our left and right movement, it's exactly the same as it has been in everything from Pong to Breakout. In fact, I kind of lied here. I am directly messing with the X and Y position of my square. I'm not dealing with X's velocity. So we're directly just, if you press left, just move the square 4 pixels to the left. Okay? And this part right here, is redundant. I kind of forgot to take that out because this is doing the same thing as this. And I'm not even sure what this, I must have recycled this code. Sorry. Because that shouldn't be necessary because that was just a boundary check to make sure that we're not going off the side of the screen. And since we already have it here, we certainly don't need it here. So this should look really familiar. This is the same as we've always done it. But this is new. And notice I don't have anything for down because if it's a gravity-based game, down should be handled automatically. And we'll get to that code in just a second. So we just have left, right, and then up. And up looks really different because what we're going to do is we're going to check if the up button has been pressed, and we want to also check that may jump again is okay. This is where we stop double jumping from happening. And later on, we might put some more complicated stuff in this if statement. If you want to allow like a single double jump, maybe something like that, we can mess with this. But at the moment, I'm just going to keep double jump off. Okay? And we want to make sure that we're on solid ground too. Okay? So you need to be standing on the ground or on a platform to actually be able to jump. And we're going to really kick up the Y velocity. And remember, in video games, going up is actually a negative and going down is a positive. So we're going to kick that up pretty high and then set may jump again to false. So you can't do that double jump. Okay? Otherwise, if you haven't pressed that up button recently, you can go ahead and set that may jump again true. And then down here, we are going to, here's where we actually start pulling things down. So you're heading up at a pretty fast speed, but then every game loop, you are going to tick that velocity down and start falling pretty soon. So within like 20 game loops, we're actually not going to be heading up anymore. We're going to be heading down. And then as you go down, it's going to actually stop you from going down too fast. Like if you take a look at how this thing runs, so notice that when we fall, we pretty quickly reach like a terminal velocity. You can mess with this number based on what you need from your game. Okay, maybe you want to let your player fall faster. Okay, so let's double it. Let's say 8. Okay, and notice when I run it, we're going to fall a lot faster. Okay, so this thing here, this cap, is basically your terminal velocity. How fast will you let your player fall? And you can just take this off all the way, but it might be kind of hard to actually manage to play the game at that point. Okay, so basically it's gravity itself. I mean, we did have to do other stuff, but this is the core of gravity. Just these 4 lines here. We're just saying, hey, if you're not on solid ground, then make sure you are pulling downwards. This is the part that actually pulls your player down to the bottom of the screen. And this part isn't even required, but it's a good idea to stop him from falling too fast. Okay? Here's where we actually add that Y velocity to our player's Y position. This does nothing because, as we noticed up above, I'm actually just directly impacting the X coordinate. So you could probably take this line out and it would act the same way, but it doesn't hurt by doing anything because we never actually do anything to DX. So you're just like adding 0 to the X position. So I'm going to leave it in there in case we decide to mess with that later because it's not doing anything. Cool. And then here's just the render section. Nothing new there. Here's just cleaning up. This is the end of our game loop right here. So you don't actually get to hear it unless you kill the game. Okay, so in a nutshell, that's gravity. Hopefully it makes sense. And we will, in later lectures, actually talk about how to do fun stuff with this, like have them stop on platforms or things like that. All right, good luck. And let me know if you need any help.